Hello, welcome back to another tutorial. So for March's Little Landscape by Post, I had created a corresponding sticker from the painting on the right to go with it, and it was a lot of fun. I did a blurry out of focus background, I added some water droplets, and I played with some mixed media, some pastel pencils, etc. So I figured since I'm painting it anyway, I would record it and make a tutorial for you. So I am just starting out with a sketch first. If you don't want to watch this part, you can kind of go ahead. But the way I paint daffodils is I start by creating a circle, and then inside that circle, we're going to create another circle with sort of ruffled edges for the trumpet. And then daffodils have 6 petals, most of them anyway. There's so many different varieties, but these ones have 6 petals. A lot of the times they overlap. You don't have to have them overlap if you don't want, but I have some of them overlapping. From the bottom of that daffodil, I'm just drawing a long skinny stem down, and then I'm going to start to add my leaves. So these are just tall, skinny. Some of them are broad, but mine are just tall and skinny, and they're kind of wrapped around the stem of the daffodil. You can add as many as you want. I just I just went a little crazy. um, so for the side view of a daffodil, I start with that circle, and I want my daffodil to sort of be facing downward. So I'm putting another circle, a little ruffled circle, sort of in the middle down to the left, as you can see, and then we create a little triangle going upward, and then around that we will start to place our petals. Most of them will be sort of to the right of the flower, and then I'm just counting to see where I could fit more. After, you can have the petal sticking out from the front. I decided to have it sticking out. Sometimes you might not see it and it might be hidden behind. It really depends on how the flower is facing, but that's why it's nice to sketch it out. And then I'm just kind of connecting them together so they're a little bunch and just adding in some more leaves. Once I have the initial sketch down, I like to remove as much pencil as I can with a kneaded eraser. And after that, I felt like I needed a little bit more, so I added in another bud and some more leaves in the background. And then what I'm doing here is I am masking out my daffodils, just the flower heads and a few of the leaves and stems. I'm keeping a few of the leaves out because I'm going to paint over them with my background and sort of use a lifting technique to just play around. This is really an experiment for me, and yeah, I figured I'd show you. So once that's completely dry, I'm going in with a very light wash of water. So my water had a little yellow tinge to it, which is completely fine because I knew I was going to be using a lot of yellow and green. So typically you would use clean water if you're going to do this wet into wet method, but we're just going to put yellow right into this wet mess right after. So I'm just lifting up as much as I can, so it's just, you just got a little bit of a sheen to it, nothing really puddly soaking wet. And then I'm just using a wash brush, and I'm dropping in some yellow in here. This is a cadmium yellow. I used mixes of cadmium yellow and also quinacridone gold in the background, and a little bit of, well, maybe more than a little bit of quinacridone burnt orange. So I also use a little bit of Daniel Smith Undersea green. You could use sap green as well and mix it with that orangey color. I kind of wanted these muted sort of neutral colors, a little bit moody. So this is the Daniel Smith Undersea green, and it's kind of getting to this more of a browner undertone, which I really liked as well. And this is just our first layer because this is, I already know it's going to dry lighter than I want it. So I'm just going in and creating this first base. Some of these greens are a little bit more green, some are a little bit more brown. It really depends on how you mix the colors together. But I'm just kind of dropping that in, playing around with flicking the brush a bit. I've introduced a little bit of green gold in there to brighten it up. And I really like to use darker colors around where I put the masking fluid. And as you can see, it dried so much lighter. So we're going over it again. And some of the spaces I might leave a little bit lighter and just kind of play on what we already have there because I don't want to really ruin what we have. But for the most part, I'm pretty much going to go over this whole thing again. The quinacridone gold is just absolutely stunning for glazing and bringing out that beautiful glow. I just love it. But you can see we're just using the tip of the brush And this is a flat wash brush, and we're just kind of dragging that up, and it's sort of creating these petal shapes in the background. I'm sitting outside, so you might hear birds and dogs barking and maybe even some wind chimes. I don't know. There's a little bird, but that's why you kind of hear the noise. And then if you want, you can darken up your green with some indigo or red or that burnt orange, whatever you want to get that undertone. But this is a really deep, deep greenish color. And I'm kind of going around there because the idea is when I lift this masking tape up, we're going to have a really nice defined edge. And then I'm blotting it as well with a paper towel and sort of lifting. And then again, I am glazing on top of this and bringing out that glow. Do you see how beautiful that quinacridone gold is? It's one of my favorite paints. It's just so versatile and so pretty. Now, while that background was still wet, I was able to go in and lift some more petals out. Very, very subtle lifting creates such a difference. You can see how it dried so much lighter than what it looked like. So that's why layers are just so super important in watercolor. So clearly I am removing that masking fluid now. It's so satisfying. So we're left with these crisp edges, and we are going to just fill in our daffodils. So I am using cadmium yellow. I love cadmium yellow. It's, again, so versatile. Gamboge is a beautiful yellow to use as well. If you want them a little bit more bright, you can use a lemon yellow. And then this layer, again, it's not going to be extremely detailed. My first layer is more like a wash and a placement. Now for the center, I chose to make the trumpets a little bit darker. Some daffodils don't have darker. They're all yellow, or there's so many different variations, like I said earlier. So you don't have to do this part, but I really like the contrast. So I mixed in a bit of cadmium orange, or you can use maybe like a Pyrrol Scarlet and mix it with your yellow. And you can just go around that trumpet and sort of drop it around, and it kind of blends together, as you can see, creating a really nice variation. But I just continue to fill in those petals, and then I'm going into the stems, which are a lighter green. So this is my green gold. You can use sap green with a bit of yellow if you want to. Now for the bud, I painted the stem in, and then I painted the yellow part of the bud in, and I kind of let those also blend together because, again, this is just our first layer. We're going to be able to add details on top. So for my leaves, I'm just filling them in with varying different shades of green. So I will first lay down a light wash, and then I'm kind of building on top of that or dropping in a bit of darker green in here and there. And then I will add a few more darker leaves in the background. And then I will just fill them all in until I am happy with the leaf placement. Now I really want to add in some real depth. I wanted this to be pretty moody. So I'm using that very dark mixture, and I am pulling out a really dark petal in front. I wanted to be able to go back in later and add some white lines on top of it. So that's another reason why I'm creating some darker leaves here. So I'm going to be using some white ink. You can use the bleed proof white ink, or you can use white gouache, whatever you have. I also played with pastels, like I said earlier in the beginning of the video, but we'll get there. So yeah, I'm just adding in some darker leaves, same shape, and just kind of seeing where it takes me. So I use a sketch as a guideline. It's not always concrete. Things change for me a lot. But you can see once you start painting and seeing how your composition comes together, you can start changing it up if you want to. You can also carve out some leaves with that darker color if maybe it gets a little bit too blended together. So here I'm kind of carving out that one leaf to the right. And I'm just going to do this until I am happy with my leaf placement, and we'll go on to the next layers. So when you want to add shadows to something like yellow, a good way to do that is by using a neutral tone or a purple undertone. So I mixed up a very light grayish, almost purple tinged mixture here. And I'm just going in and creating some details within my petals. And then once those dry, I'm going back over top of the petals and glazing it again with that yellow. So you can see it gives it a very nice shadow. And then for the trumpets, I'm going back into a darker mixture of that very orangey reddish tone, and I am defining the trumpet, defining the ruffles, the centers, and then I'm going to keep on layering and glazing to create depth within those petals and now in the leaves. So yeah, this is just, it's a layering game sometimes. Just adding a few more into the mix and defining the leaves a little bit more. And now if you want to use your watercolor very thick, you can do that as well. You can use like little to no water and you get really some really fun textural elements, almost like painting with gouache. So I mixed that neutral color in with some of my yellow, and I'm going in and defining and adding more shadows into my petals again with a very fine line brush. And I'm going back into the trumpets with the darker reddish mixture. And you see I'm adding little lines in the trumpets, creating, like, really deepening those folds. When I'm painting, I tend to jump around and move to areas that have dried and then go back. Or if they're still damp, I love working into damp. So that's kind of why I go back and forth. Now, I also mixed up some of that green gold, or you could do the sap green with some bright lemon yellow. And you can mix it really, really opaque, or you can add in a bit of opaque white paint, and you can really see how that pulled out the stems. I'm using some light washes and adding in some more background leaves. And here I'm using a negative painting technique. I'm sort of carving around those stems and making those back leaves a little bit darker so that those stems in the front really pop. And this is a great way to add some contrast as well to the painting. Now I want to lighten this leaf at the top a bit, so I'm using a yellowish green, that green gold, and you can see I'm kind of scrubbing my brush a bit to lift as I go, and I could see it goes from dark to light at the top. Now I also want to show you, once this dries, you can scrub around the leaf and then blot it with a paper towel to create almost like a glowing effect around your leaves. So that is what I'm experimenting with here. So I'm just lifting it up with some paper towel and you'll see it start to create this really pretty glowy effect, almost like the light is hitting it and sort of wrapping around it. So I'm just going to keep doing that until I'm happy with it. And then we'll be able to also glaze over this spot so it all blends together after. And then I'm just going to continue doing this to a bunch of the leaves, not all of them, just a few of them. And you can go back in if you lift too much and define that leaf as well. But I saw another watercolor artist do this with, I believe it was around a hummingbird, and it looked so pretty. So I'm going back in and I'm glazing with that quinacridone gold again. And it kind of just helps blend everything together. And we're just adding in some highlights as we go. So now I've got my bleed proof white ink, and you can mix this. It's the fun thing about this is you can mix it with your paint. So I've mixed it with some green gold and I mixed it with the quinacridone gold, and it gives you that tinge of color that you're using, and I'm able to pull out all these really beautiful details within the leaves. So I'm using a very fine liner here. This is from Christy Rice Paint Crush. I always use this liner brush. I love it so much. It comes in a set though. But we are just doing lines down the stems and adding those highlights in. And I'm also adding in some detail within my bud. So I gave it a bit of a sort of a hood on it. It's whatever that's the casing is that comes off when the bud blooms into a flower. But yeah, you can start adding in details and it really makes everything come to life. And I'm really making sure to add these highlights to add some brightness where the sun would hit. And I wanted to see how it would look glazing the leaves with the quinacridone gold. And it really, really does look so cool. It brightens up that white ink, but you have to be a little bit careful because it will remove that bleed proof white stuff. So just lightly doing that once it completely dried. And of course it will dry, it won't dry as vibrant. So we'll have to see how it looks once it's fully dry. And I'm just going back in around. I don't know how many layers we got here, but I used the burnt orange to go around some areas too, because it was getting a little boring with just the lighter yellow color. And I really want these daffodils to pop. I just love these tones together. They are so pretty. Just going around. You can see I kind of switch brushes a bunch. I go between round brush and a liner brush often. And I always use the same brushes pretty much. So I stick with a very thin liner brush, and then I'll use a round number 2 or a number 3 or a number 1. And then I rarely really paint with a large brush. So I have a number 6 and number 8 round brush, and those are the ones I use quite often. So now if you want, you can go in and pull some highlights in your daffodil leaves. So I'm using that same ink. I don't even know if it is ink. It's bleed proof, Dr. P.H. Martin. And I'm just going in and pulling some highlights and adding some lines. And if you want to extend your leaves and kind of have them overlap, because you know with watercolor you can't really go over a darker color with a lighter color, so that's why it's so great to be able to use this type of medium. So I'm going back and forth between using a darker shade and then adding in the highlights on top. And I wanted the edges of the petals to be a little bit fun, so I kind of do a squiggly line and then made a little bit of a point. And I'm focusing on adding those lines from the center of the stamen down the lines, and then we have like these two brighter lines in the center, so they create a highlight. And then the center of those two brighter lines is almost darker, but you can see here kind of what I'm talking about. And then there's very, very light lines within the petals. And then I'm going around and just kind of defining the edges. And they're a little bit transparent, so you can play with seeing the leaves behind if you want. And then I'm just defining that bud a little bit more. Anything that I lost when I was glazing over top to see how it would look. And I kept going back. I wanted more contrast. You don't have to do all this, but I figured I'd record it and show you. And now I want to make sure that we don't just forget about that center there. So I'm creating some lines in there and some contrast and deepening it up. And I want to define that, I don't know what it's called. I should know the names of every flower since I paint them so often. The the little stem thing in the middle, like this piston or pistil or something. I'm trying to create a shadow around it and then add some highlights to really make it pop. And then I am also defining the side view on here. So I've made it a little bit darker, and then I'm building on top, and then I will bring back those highlights. And again, I wanted to change up the direction of that center thing. um, so I'm honestly blending this out to correct it. So I've lost a lot of the work I did in the beginning, but I felt it was kind of important to make it look a little bit more anatomically correct. I'm letting that dry, and as that dries, I'm using this bright yellow mixture. So a lemon yellow with that white, and I'm going over, and it's giving it a really nice pop. So when experimenting, you might lose a lot of work and figure out, pivot to something else, but it all matters. All of the layers do end up mattering. But I'm blending it out and going around. It adds depth. So here we are again. Now it's a little bit dry, so I'm using that same sort of yellow mixture, and I'm pulling out that top ruffle, and then I'm creating these very thin, quick lines to the center. And you can start to see it coming a little bit more to life. Go around and add some more details in there. I want it to look really ruffled. Sometimes you might want to step back, walk away, and come back. Adding some darker shadow in there. So this is almost like a brownish mix that I had there, but still in the same family as everything that I'm using. And then while that dries, I'm going back in and pulling more highlights. So I went into the stems and now the centers, and we're doing a real bright yellow again. Now that I'm watching this back, I really did lots of layers on this painting. Now over here, I wanted to give it the illusion that you can kind of see through it. And then I am going in with that white ink or gouache, and I'm just creating these little drops, and that center will be empty, so it'll kind of look like you can see through them. We're not doing anything crazy technical with the drops. And I have some that are dripping from the petals and some that are sitting on top. So they're really just sort of half circles. And you can see here, they're not all perfectly round. So I'm just going around. This one's sort of dripping down the leaf there. And I'm going to put one on top of it, just a circle. And you can use the white to define the outside of the leaf as well. But yeah, we did lots of layers on this painting. You don't need to do all these layers, but they're fun. It's fun. This is how you learn to do things. See what works, see what doesn't. Watch other people's tutorials and see how they did it. It's the beauty of this. So now I told you I wanted to play around with some of my pastels. I have so many pastels. I used to do pastel portraits, like hyper realistic ones. So I'm like, why not play with them a little bit more? So I'm adding some highlights on here. The thing with these is they don't really set, so when you close the book, it might go to the other side. And I don't like to spray my pastels with any kind of fixative because I always feel like it kind of changes the color up a bit. But this journal that I have is fine for playing around. So I'm just buffing these circles in so that we have some like blurred out daffodils in the background, or more the idea of it. And then I wanted to experiment with using some pastels on the stems as well. So I've got pastel sticks, I've got pastel pencils, and they're all different. This is, we're defining those edges. So I purposely left it a little bit undefined so that I could pull out some highlights from the pencil as well, or the pastel. And this was fun. It was a fun painting. And I like the moodiness of it. I love a good moody painting. And then I want this to look like it's folded a bit, so I add some highlight to the front. And then I'm bringing some of that orange in there. And some more of that bright green. And then you just blend it out with your finger. So this area needs a little bit more of a pop. Same here. So I'm using that pastel stick and I'm just blending it in. And it gives it almost like a glowy, pretty look. Yeah. A little bit lighter here. And then in here, I just needed to kind of blend that out together. It looked a little disjointed. And then maybe you should put down the pastel and walk away. No, I just had so much fun with this painting. I really love journals for this. I recently bought a few different ones because my intentions are to really start journaling and being a little bit more free and playful with my paintings. I know I do a lot of playful things, but if you guys want to do a journal series with me, please let me know because I'm brainstorming a lot of things. My favorite part, removing the tape. The best tape, Old Bean soft tape. If you haven't tried it, you should give it a try. I decided to add in a little bit more water droplets with the pastel pencil just to see, and that's it. Put down the pencil, walk away. You're all done. But yeah, I know I overworked this painting a little bit, but that's what it's about. Experimenting and having fun. You can see all the pretty details up close here. I just love the colors and how they came together. I know I had to speed up this tutorial a little bit, so if you have any questions at all, just let me know. Thanks so much for being here. I hope that you enjoyed this and that you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.